George Clooney. George Clooney is the only Batman actor who has spent nearly 3 decades publicly apologizing for his performance, and he started apologizing before the film even finished its theatrical run. To understand why Clooney's Batman failed so completely, you have to understand what Warner Bros. Was chasing in 1997. Batman Forever had made $336 million by injecting neon colors and campy humor into Tim Burton's Gothic foundation. The studio looked at those numbers and decided the formula was simple: more color, more toys, more spectacle, less darkness. Director Joel Schumacher received a mandate to make Batman and Robin the most merchandise-friendly film in the franchise's history. Every design choice prioritized action figures over storytelling. Clooney stepped into this disaster with approximately 2 weeks of preparation. Val Kilmer had worn the cowl in Batman Forever, but declined to return. Some reports say he was fired. Others say he walked away from Schumacher's vision. Either way, Warner Bros. Needed a new Batman immediately, and Clooney was the biggest star willing to take the role on short notice. He later admitted in multiple interviews that he walked onto set without understanding the character. Clooney assumed his natural charm would carry the performance the same way it carried everything else he'd done. He was wrong in ways that would define his career's biggest failure. The fundamental problem with Clooney's Batman is that he played Bruce Wayne as the real person and Batman as the costume, which is exactly backwards. Every successful Batman actor understands that Bruce Wayne is the mask. The billionaire playboy is the performance. The obsessive, traumatized vigilante is who he really is. When the cowl goes on, the pretending stops. Clooney never made that switch. Watch any scene where he's supposed to be intimidating criminals or interrogating villains. He delivers the lines with the same relaxed charisma he'd use at a cocktail party. There's no menace, no obsession, no sense that this man has spent 20 years processing childhood trauma through controlled violence. He's George Clooney in a rubber suit, and that's all he ever becomes. The script didn't help. Batman and Robin gave audiences the Bat credit card, a moment so absurd that it's become shorthand for everything wrong with the Schumacher era. It gave audiences ice puns from Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze that numbered in the dozens. But other actors have survived bad scripts. Michael Keaton's Batman Returns had moments of camp and excess, yet Keaton's committed performance grounded everything around him. Christian Bale would later deliver iconic work in The Dark Knight Rises, despite a plot that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The difference is that those actors understood the character well enough to anchor the absurdity. Clooney couldn't anchor anything because he never found the character in the first place. In a 2011 interview, he said he destroyed the franchise and accepted full responsibility. In 2017, he told The Hollywood Reporter that he understood why fans hated his performance. He's even joked that he pays people to not watch the film. The box office confirmed the disaster. Batman and Robin made $238 million worldwide against a $125 million budget. Profitable on paper, but a massive disappointment compared to Batman Forever's $336 million. Warner Bros. Shut down the Batman franchise entirely. For 8 years, no new Batman film entered production. When Christopher Nolan finally rebooted the character with Batman Begins in 2005, he specifically positioned the film as a rejection of everything Schumacher had done. Darker, grounded, psychologically complex. Everything Clooney's version wasn't. Schumacher himself apologized to fans before his death in 2020. But Clooney's apology tour has been more extensive than any director's. He knows what went wrong. He knows he didn't do the homework. And he spent 27 years making sure everyone else knows he knows. Val Kilmer. If George Clooney is the Batman everyone mocks, Val Kilmer is the Batman everyone forgets. And that forgettability is the entire problem with his performance. To understand why Kilmer never connected with audiences, you have to understand the impossible situation Batman Forever created in 1995. Tim Burton had directed 2 Batman films that established a gothic, psychologically tortured version of the character. Michael Keaton played Bruce Wayne as genuinely unhinged, a man who might be as crazy as the villains he fought. The first 2 films were dark, weird, and absolutely committed to their tone. Then Warner Bros. Decided dark and weird wasn't selling enough Happy Meals. Joel Schumacher came aboard with a mandate to brighten the franchise. More color, more action, more accessibility for younger audiences. Everything that made Burton's films distinctive was exactly what the studio wanted to strip away. And Schumacher needed a new Batman because Michael Keaton took one look at the direction and walked away. Kilmer inherited a role defined by darkness, while every production decision pushed toward light. The result was a Batman caught between two visions, committed to neither, and lost somewhere in the middle. Watch Kilmer's performance carefully, and you'll see an actor who seems disconnected from his own movie. He delivers brooding lines while surrounded by neon and circus imagery. He attempts emotional depth in scenes designed for spectacle. Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey, playing Two-Face and the Riddler respectively, are chewing scenery so aggressively that they swallow every scene Kilmer shares with them. He can't compete because he's trying to play a different movie than everyone around him. Behind the scenes, Kilmer had a reputation for being extraordinarily difficult. Schumacher later called him childish and impossible, and said working with him was the worst experience of his directorial career. Reports from the set described Kilmer as dismissive of the material, uninterested in collaboration, and frequently at odds with the crew. Kilmer himself has partially confirmed this reputation while adding context. He said the Batsuit made performance nearly impossible. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't move naturally. Every scene required working around physical limitations that no other costume in his career had imposed. The frustration showed. But other actors have overcome this obstacle. Keaton dealt with similar restrictions and delivered two iconic performances anyway. He found ways to communicate through the limitations rather than surrendering to them. Kilmer never found that adaptation. The film made money, $336 million worldwide, but Kilmer's Batman contributed nothing to its success. Audiences came for Jim Carrey's manic Riddler, for the neon spectacle, for the soundtrack featuring Seal's Kiss from a Rose. Nobody came for Kilmer's Bruce Wayne, and nobody remembered him afterward. For an actor of Kilmer's caliber, this anonymity is damning. He delivered transformative work in The Doors, becoming Jim Morrison so completely that Morrison's bandmates couldn't tell the difference in documentary footage. He'd played Doc Holliday in Tombstone with such charisma that he stole the film from Kurt Russell. His career proved he could disappear into roles and create something unforgettable. He brought none of that commitment to Batman. The performance feels like a paycheck rather than a passion project, and audiences sensed it immediately. When Batman and Robin went into production, the studio didn't even consider asking Kilmer to return. Whatever happened behind the scenes had burned that bridge completely. Kilmer's Batman stands as proof that a talented actor in a commercially successful film can still fail the character entirely. He wasn't bad enough to be memorable like Clooney. He wasn't good enough to be celebrated like Keaton. He existed in the cowl for 2 hours and vanished from cultural memory almost immediately. That disappearance is the review his performance deserves. Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck's Batman killed people, and for a significant portion of the fan base, that single choice made everything else irrelevant. To understand why Affleck's Dark Knight divided audiences so completely, you have to understand what director Zack Snyder was attempting with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice in 2016. This wasn't a Batman origin story. This wasn't even a Batman in his prime. This was a Batman who had been fighting crime in Gotham for over 20 years, who had watched his Robin get murdered by the Joker, who had seen his crusade accomplish nothing, and who had descended into something brutal and unrecognizable. Snyder's vision was deliberately transgressive. He wanted audiences to see Batman at his absolute worst, a man who brands criminals, who uses guns, who drives the Batmobile through human bodies, who snaps necks in combat. The character had fallen so far that he no longer resembled the hero fans expected. That fall was intentional, because Snyder planned a redemption arc. Superman's sacrifice would remind Batman of what heroism actually meant, pulling him back from the edge. The problem was that many fans didn't want to watch Batman fall in the first place. The warehouse fight in Batman v Superman showcases the controversy perfectly. Affleck's Batman tears through a room full of armed criminals with brutal efficiency, and multiple opponents clearly die from his attacks. He stabs people. He throws crates that crush skulls. He uses a criminal as a human shield against gunfire. For fans who'd spent decades understanding that Batman never kills, that his refusal to cross that line is the entire point of his moral framework, these scenes felt like betrayal rather than innovation. Christopher Nolan earned the right to test Batman's limits in The Dark Knight Rises, because audiences had spent 2 films falling in love with that version of the character. When Bane broke Batman, it hurt because we'd watched him triumph first. Affleck's Batman started broken. We never saw him at his best before watching him at his worst. The deconstruction happened without construction, and audiences had nothing to hold on to while the character violated his own principles. Behind the scenes, Affleck's tenure became increasingly troubled. He was originally attached to write, direct, and star in a solo Batman film, a project that excited fans given his Oscar-winning work on Argo. But he dropped directing first, citing a desire to focus on performance. Then, he dropped writing. Then, after Justice League's chaotic production and critical failure, he walked away from the role entirely. Personal struggles overlapped with production chaos. Affleck was going through a divorce during Batman v Superman's press tour. He's spoken openly about his recovery from alcoholism during this period. The famous Sad Affleck meme, showing his exhausted, hollow expression during a press interview, captured something real about where he was mentally and emotionally. Justice League made everything worse. Snyder departed during post-production following a family tragedy, and Joss Whedon was brought in to finish the film. The theatrical version pleased almost nobody. Snyder fans felt the director's vision had been gutted, while general audiences found the finished product incoherent. Affleck's Batman suffered most from the tonal whiplash, cracking jokes in Whedon's scenes while remaining grimly serious in Snyder's footage. The Snyder Cut, released in 2021, rehabilitated Affleck's performance for some viewers. The 4-hour director's vision restored context and coherence that the theatrical version lacked. But for other fans, no amount of context could redeem a Batman who kills. The character has operated under a no-kill rule for over 80 years. A Batman who murders is just a well-equipped serial killer, targeting people he's decided deserve death. Affleck returned briefly in The Flash, providing closure to his version of the character, but confirmed afterward that his time as Batman was finished. His version will always be the controversial one. Clooney was universally mocked. Kilmer was universally forgotten. Affleck inspired passionate defenders and passionate critics in equal measure, and that polarization defined his entire tenure. Lewis Wilson, the first actor to play Batman on screen, arrived with something no other version has ever carried: an explicitly racist narrator celebrating American concentration camps. Lewis Wilson starred in the 1943 Columbia Pictures serial, 15 Chapters of Wartime Propaganda, that transformed Batman from a crime fighter into a weapon against the Japanese. To understand why this Batman feels so fundamentally wrong today, you have to understand what the serial was actually designed to accomplish. The United States had entered World War II 2 years earlier. Japanese Americans had been forcibly relocated to internment camps through Executive Order 9066, a policy that the serial doesn't just ignore, but actively celebrates. The opening narration describes how Japanese people had been wisely removed from the neighborhood where the story takes place. The narrator praises the wise government for imprisoning American citizens based on their ethnicity. Batman himself serves as validation for this policy. He fights Dr. Daka, a Japanese spy played by white actor J. Carroll Naish in Yellowface, so exaggerated it resembles cartoon villainy. Daka operates from the Temple of the Devil in Little Tokyo, a location the serial specifically notes is now emptied of Japanese residents thanks to internment. The subtext isn't subtle. Batman protects good Americans from Japanese threats, and the government protects Americans by removing Japanese people entirely. Wilson was 23 years old when he took the role, with almost no film experience. His performance carries all the limitations of 1940s serial acting: stiff dialogue delivery, theatrical gestures borrowed from stage performance, and no psychological depth whatsoever. But these performance problems pale next to the content problems surrounding him. The Batman costume itself was a disaster of low-budget filmmaking. The ears on the cowl flopped, rather than standing upright. The cape bunched awkwardly around the shoulders. The gray fabric looked cheap even by 1940s standards. Wilson's physicality didn't help. He lacked the imposing presence that Batman requires, looking more like an accountant in costume than a creature of the night. The serial did contribute one lasting element to Batman mythology. It introduced Alfred as a thin, refined butler rather than the heavyset comedic character from early comics. DC liked this interpretation enough to retroactively redesign Alfred in the comics to match the serial version. The butler that fans recognize today, dignified, British, loyal, originated with actor William Austin in 1943. But one positive contribution cannot redeem 15 chapters of propaganda. Wilson made a second appearance as Batman in a 1949 serial that dropped most of the explicit racism while maintaining the low-budget limitations. He left acting shortly afterward and never returned to the role. His Batman endures only as a reminder that the character's history includes chapters most fans would prefer to forget. Every other actor on this list failed to capture something essential about Batman. Lewis Wilson's Batman captured something essential about 1943 America: the racism, the fear, the willingness to imprison citizens based on ethnicity. Robert Lowery. If Lewis Wilson is the Batman history should forget, Robert Lowery is the Batman history already has. The 1949 serial Batman and Robin replaced Wilson and stripped out the wartime propaganda that made the original so uncomfortable. No more Japanese villains. No more internment celebrations. Just a generic mad scientist called the Wizard threatening Gotham with a remote control device while Batman and Robin investigated between what appear to be very long naps. Lowery was 36 years old when he took the role, significantly older than any previous Batman and noticeably soft around the middle for a character defined by peak physical prowess. His costume fit poorly in ways that suggested nobody tried very hard to make it better. The cowl's ears drooped, the cape tangled. The utility belt looked like something purchased from a costume shop rather than designed by a billionaire's resources. His Bruce Wayne lacked any distinguishing characteristics whatsoever. Lowery delivered lines competently, hit his marks reliably, and showed up on time to a production that clearly didn't care whether he brought anything special. The serial's 15 chapters blur together into a haze of fistfights, cliffhangers, and exposition scenes that exist only to set up the next fistfight. What makes Lowery significant as a study in failure isn't that he was bad. He wasn't, really. He did the job adequately. Nothing about his performance was technically wrong or embarrassingly incompetent. The problem is that adequacy accomplished nothing. There's a version of mediocrity that generates discussion, performances bad enough to mock, choices strange enough to debate. Lowery achieved a different kind of mediocrity: complete forgettability, absolute absence from cultural memory. When Adam West's Batman became a phenomenon in 1966, transforming the character into a pop culture sensation that dominated television ratings, nobody interviewed Lowery for retrospective commentary. Nobody asked what it was like to wear the cowl 17 years earlier. He had been so thoroughly forgotten that even nostalgia skipped over him entirely. He continued working in B-movies and television westerns throughout the 1950s and 1960s. He never discussed the Batman role publicly in any significant interview that survived. He died in 1971, completely unconnected to the character he'd once played. Some Batman actors become cautionary tales. Clooney teaches what happens when you rely on charm instead of character work. Kilmer teaches what happens when you don't care enough to try. Lowery doesn't teach anything because there's nothing to examine. He wore the costume. He said the words. Then he vanished so completely that even obsessive fans struggle to remember he existed. Being forgotten might be the worst failure possible. At least Clooney left an impression. David Mazouz. David Mazouz played Bruce Wayne for 5 seasons and 105 episodes of Fox's Gotham, more screen time than every film actor combined. Audiences watched him grow from a traumatized 13-year-old witnessing his parents' murder to an 18-year-old ready to become the Dark Knight. They never actually saw him become Batman. When Gotham premiered in 2014, showrunners Bruno Heller and Danny Cannon pitched the series as Bruce Wayne's definitive origin story, the complete journey from child victim to masked vigilante. The pilot opened with the Wayne murders, young Bruce screaming over his parents' bodies while rookie detective Jim Gordon swore to find their killer. The setup promised something no film had delivered: the full transformation, step by step, across years of television. Every season pushed Bruce closer to his destiny. He trained with Alfred. He investigated his parents' murder. He built proto-suits in the Wayne Enterprises basement. He experimented with vigilantism, getting beaten repeatedly while learning to fight. He confronted young versions of Penguin, Riddler, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy. By season 5, he'd essentially lived through most of Batman's comic book history without technically being Batman. Every season finale teased that next year would finally deliver the payoff everyone was waiting for. Next year always found another reason to delay. The series finale attempted delivery badly. After a 10-year time jump, Batman finally appeared on screen in shadows and quick cuts carefully constructed to avoid showing Mazouz clearly in the full costume. A larger stunt performer handled action sequences. Mazouz appeared primarily as adult Bruce Wayne, glimpsed briefly in ways that felt like the production was embarrassed to show him fully transformed. The explanation given was his slim build, Batman needs physical presence, and Mazouz was a lean teenager who'd spent 5 years acting rather than bodybuilding. But muscle suits exist. Camera angles can hide limitations. Other productions have solved this problem hundreds of times. The real issue seemed to be that Gotham's creative team never figured out how to become a Batman show. They knew how to tease the transformation. They never learned how to deliver it. 5 seasons of build-up ended with shadows, editing tricks, and a finale that felt like running out of time rather than reaching a destination. What makes this especially frustrating is that Mazouz actually delivered good work throughout the series. His young Bruce Wayne felt appropriately traumatized without being unwatchable. His relationship with Sean Pertwee's Alfred was the emotional core of the entire show. When the writing gave him material, and it often did, he delivered performances that made audiences believe this kid would grow up to be Batman. The show failed him, not the other way around. Gotham proved you can spend years telling an origin story and still fail to reach the origin. That's not Mazouz's fault. He gave the production everything it asked for across 105 episodes. But his version will always carry an asterisk. The Bruce Wayne who almost became Batman, then kind of did, if you squint at the shadows and don't ask too many questions about who's actually wearing the suit. 5 years of almost ending in close enough isn't a destination. It's a disappointment. Subscribe for more content like this.